Coming up on A Girl and a Gun, we discuss the latest with Rhythm Hues in the visual effects industry. We talk about the Australian government fiasco and what's going on there. And I'm joined by John Maisels, our special guest, and we talk SMPTE.
A Girl and a Gun, episode 1, recorded March 28th, 2013. Politics just burns my brain.
All you need to make them do is a girl and a gun. Come along and join the party. I'm still at the sun.
Hello, and welcome to our first official episode of A Girl and a Gun, the show for filmmakers and content creators. I am Phil Moore, and I'm joined today by John Maisels.
Hello everybody.
This show is being brought to you at the Sydney CIFA Studios, Sydney Institute Film Academy. And just to give you a bit of background, we're on the lovely Randwick TAFE campus, and we are being produced, as always, by our students. So behind the cameras and in the control room here are our students. This is actually a class we're conducting.
You're giving the complete game away here.
Oh, that we're not professionals?
No. But, you know, everybody's doing a fabulous job and behaving very, very professional.
It is. This show is being produced as part of our multi-camera class, in fact, at CIFA. But the aim of the show is to educate our students in this, and also to educate you, our audience out there, on all things filmmaking and all things of interest to film, television, games creation, anyone who is in the content creation industry. It's for the makers, not the consumers. And that's what this show is all about. And we are going to open each show with the breaking news of the week. There, the news just broke. You can just see that happen. We've got quite a lot of stories this week, in fact. In fact, one that we're going to start with is the continuation of a story we've been talking about in our pilot episodes about Rhythm Hues, who won the Oscar for Life of Pi and were on the verge of bankruptcy when that happened.
And they were on the verge of telling everybody they were
on the verge of telling
bankruptcy
everyone
when they got the gong on the night and got hooked off.
That's right. Well, what's happened most recently is Prime Focus, an Indian VFX company, is one of those in contention to buy out Rhythm Hues potentially. They previously attempted to provide $1 million in financing to Rhythm Hues, but now they're one of the companies, because Prime Focus also got an injection of a whole heap of money from, if I find it out, AID, millions of dollars. So they're nicely funded, and they're buying out companies all over the place. They're one. There's another one, South Korean. There's Prana Studios, another VFX company in LA and Mumbai, India, and PSYOP, production and design firm that work in LA. So there's a few people bidding for possibly taking over Rhythm Hues. Because last week we discussed them moving their operations to Taiwan and hiring a lot of people there.
Well, has anybody said what is going to happen to the organisation? Like, have they indicated that it will be a complete buyout and the whole thing will move to India or somewhere else? Or are they saying just inject the funds and keep it as it is?
I don't know. I mean, Rhythm Hues themselves, as I said, they're moving operations overseas, so I don't know if that means they're closing their LA office completely.
I'd be very surprised if they did. Obviously, they're going to continue to do a lot of work on the American scene. Yeah,
they'll have to. And Prime Focus being an Indian company, but they do mostly 3D conversions for things like, what were some of the films they've worked on?
Life of Pi.
No. Prime Focus. Big budget films, tentpole stuff. They've got some titles here: Phantom Menace, Clash of Titans, Star Wars Episode 1. So this is the 3D conversions, but they're also into visual effects. So they're becoming quite a big player.
Okay.
And they do have, so they're doing work on a lot of Hollywood films. Look, I'm hoping it'll be a good marriage if it happens. Either way, Rhythm Hues, they've either got to refinance themselves, recapitalise themselves somehow.
They've basically got to find an angel or they're out the door, and despite having a catalogue of extremely high achievement.
They're going to have to do what Digital Domain did, which we discussed last week, 10, 15 years ago, where they basically had to sell to a Chinese company to stay in business and keep going.
Not necessarily a bad thing.
Not necessarily, as long as the culture of the company is maintained and they can still produce good work and everyone gets paid what they should and all the rest.
And if you look at the economies, the four biggest growing economies, the so-called BRIC countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, everybody think, oh, it's going to be the US that would come in and buy out the failing company. Now, it could very well be the Brazilian or the Russian.
Well, China and India in particular, for the film industry, by the look of it, they seem to be buying a lot of territory there. In more local news, there's been, in the past week or two, there's been two major sagas going on in the Australian Federal Parliament. One of them being the new content laws for the commercial channels and their secondary channels, like 7 Mate and 9's Go, or whatever it's called. The Australian regulations for how much Australian content they should have on those channels. And that bill was trying to be passed. Now that bill has passed and a lot of people are upset that it didn't get amended as much as it should, that there is no changes to the amount of Australian content that's being expected on these extra channels. The AWG, the Australian Writers Guild in particular, has slammed this, saying after a farcical 4 days in Canberra, since the media reform package was announced, this crucial piece of legislation determining the future of Australian stories on Australian screens was hurriedly passed through without any meaningful discussion or debate. And they go on about it.
That would surprise nobody. We were all expecting it to go through without the right level of debate and without the right outcomes, according to a lot of people.
Now, I've been trying to follow this, but it really, politics just burns my brain. But Simon Crean, who was the the Minister for the Arts at the time this was happening, was very positive, and there was the other bill that was going through, which is the Creative Australia bill, which has been going on for years. It goes back to Peter Garrett when he was Arts Minister, and that has passed, and that's gone through, and that's sort of both sides of Parliament supported this. I don't know the details of it, but I gather it's all very positive for the country. Terrific. Unfortunately, as this was happening, the very day this was happening, there was a spill in the Labor leadership. And Simon Crean was part of this. And so now he's out of a job. And
in fact, it's only, a week and a half since Simon Crean announced an enormous funding package for the arts in general, the refinancing of the Australia Council and lots of funding initiatives, and now gone.
Right.
Probably just as well he did it.
Well, this, I presume, is part of the Creative Australia, was it, or was that something else? I really don't know.
I'm going to give you a blank look that says I should know more about this, but I don't. Help.
I'm assuming that was part of the Creative Australia, because I think there were aspects of that in there. Anyway,
we should move on to a new topic before
we look like total idiots.
Yeah.
The creative industry around Australia, the creative people, for the most part, the unions, the AWG, etc., they support the Creative Australia thing. They're all rather disappointed, however, at how the content on the new channels has gone. So you win some, you lose others, unfortunately. We have a new Minister for the Arts. Let's see if he does a decent job. Everything's changing. I just can't keep up with it sometimes.
And look, if we look at our watches, it's about 5 minutes to April as we record this. We're until 20 past September, and then who knows?
Yes, by the time you watch this, it's already old news probably. Also in Australia, another big issue that's been happening lately is that there's been a parliamentary inquiry into pricing of software companies, especially Microsoft, Apple and Adobe. And we have discussed in our earlier episodes how Adobe was made to look a bit of a fool with some of their statements, their CEO in particular. They've now had them, Microsoft in particular said, if customers didn't like it, they would vote with their wallets, which is frankly the most honest answer of any of these three. They're basically saying, yeah, we charge more in Australia because we can.
I think, well, there's two ways of looking at that. You could say that the customers are going to vote with their wallets, but if it's a one-horse town, and it has been for a very long amount of time, then you really don't have the opportunity to vote with your wallet. You could choose to vote with your wallet and then you'd be out on your own trying to make something work that wasn't mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, there are alternatives to Microsoft Office, but they're not used that much.
And in fact, they could be used, but it's just what everybody's used to. Well, of course, now with, we have two iOS devices here.
Yeah.
I think if you go back 10 years, Mac was like about 7% of the market. Whereas now, and people hid, I've got a Mac. or you marked yourself as being somebody who's working in the industry here. Whereas now, like, it's not a stigma anymore.
It's
And
almost
the
a stigma not
tide
to
is
have one.
turning. Yeah, exactly.
Not to have an iOS or a Mac OS device.
And so now in fact, the tables are turning. So now we move from Microsoft having the box seat and charging huge amounts of money, and well, it'd be a new game in town now, wouldn't it?
Well, the irony is, Microsoft have said, you know, look, we charge like that because we can, effectively. Adobe said, well, look, our Creative Cloud is the same price as the US. And when they are charged with, you know, why are your other products so much more expensive here? They're saying, well, consumers in this country, they're automatically redirected to the company's Australian website.
Yes.
So they can access local discounts. Well, the products are $1,400 more in this country, so I don't know where the discount is. And community groups and purchase Adobe software at local rates. So there's supposed to be a support system there.
I tell you what would be really good. And if you've found something on the web that we need to know about, you can mail us at the special email address that will be appearing on your screen right now, and tell us where you found the $2,000 off coupon for the products that we haven't even bought yet.
And once we get an email up, we will. But as you saw there was our Twitter account. You can certainly post stuff to us through Twitter initially. But meanwhile, at Apple, for their part, their response to the committee was, well, look, our prices are pretty much even, and where we charge more, it's not our fault on iTunes. It's the movie studios, it's the record companies, it's their fees. We're just passing that cost on. It's not our fault. So they've passed the buck. Guess what? So guess who's going to be facing the music now with this committee very soon is the record companies, to see if indeed they are the ones overcharging in this country compared to the US and other places.
And what a two-edged sword that is, because nobody gets money out of the system until somebody buys a product, and products cost money. And as long as we all want something for nothing, there's going to be no money left for development, and that means artists don't get a go. And I've got a lot of sympathy with record companies charging a reasonable amount, a fair return.
Well, the trick for record companies, of course, is they've lost a lot of that market. The CDs, they don't sell. Whether it's piracy or other online versions nowadays, there's not a lot of money in CD sales. Their big money is from synchronization rights for film and TV. And for the artists, really, it's not CD sales, it's live performance and selling merch.
I can see that one day there will be no more CDs, and I'm really not looking forward to that day. Just like I wasn't looking forward to the day when 78 stopped appearing on the shelves. But I like being able to hold the media. I like being able to take it out.
I like having a physical something.
And being able to look at, you know, the slick that's in the back where you can look up information. Do you know?
I still got all my records, the vinyl records that did that.
And you know, you can take those on a plane with you. And you
The vinyls?
never have, yes, and the CDs, you know, you can open them up and you can open up the little book and you can read it, and they have flight mode. Like, you can keep reading them while you're taking off.
They have flight mode. Well, let's see what the record companies say when they appear before this committee to justify their high prices, because in terms of the artists, they are getting a lot less money out of this from iTunes sales or Spotify or any of these other things. There's a lot less of the pie that they're getting, unfortunately. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is the record company. So let's see if Apple is right and they're the ones that are ripping us off. Anyway, back to Australia again. There's something new. Tony Iannero, I'm hoping I'm getting the name right, and Mark D'Angelo, formerly from Paramount Pictures Australia, they've launched a new distribution medium called Backlot Studios. And the idea here is that they will charge you a fee as the producer of a film based on how many screens, cinema screens, it gets shown on. And they only charge you per screen. So it's almost like four-walling your film. And for those who don't know, four-walling is when you literally pay and you hire the theatre and you take the box office and you own all the box office. So you hire out the theatre, you pay that, you know, that fee, and you hire the screen, and then you just make the profit from what the tickets that you sell.
And that's called four-walling.
And that's four-walling. You hire the four walls and you screen your movie. What Backlot Studios appears to be doing is they do the hard work of hiring the theatre for you, and they only charge you a particular fee for that theatre, but then everything beyond that on the box office you take. So apart from paying out the fee for the theatre, which you would have done yourself and had to organise yourself, you get 100% of the box office.
That's a really interesting model. So why would that work to the theatre owner's advantage?
Well, if they're getting the money for the screening, for the time, the session, they get what they would normally charge anyway, like a film festival would, or like if you're going to go to Hoyts and say, we have your little
So
theatre
we're
on a
talking
Thursday
about
afternoon?
forewalling just for a specific session?
A specific
or for a
session,
run?
or whatever sessions you want.
Yeah.
And you hire the theatre out for a week on a certain cinema,
Or just for a day, or just for a couple
or for a
of hours?
day, or whatever you want, and depending on how successful you think your film's going to be. And when it starts dropping off, you say, that's it, that'll
One
stop.
screening, 6 people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you manage to sell your film to a major distributor, they're going to do a blanket distribution, or with a certain number of screens, and they will have a deal for it'll play in this cinema for 2 weeks. And if no one comes, you're still paying for the 2 weeks, basically. Now, I'm not sure
Which,
if
of course, is one of the great things about multiplexes. That's why multiplexes work, because when nobody's turning up, you still have other product drawing people into the cinema.
This is one of the things of digital cinema where the great thing was, because it's a digital film, digital projectors, it's actually quite easy to get your film screened there. It doesn't take much if there's a screen available and you can do it. But it's not happening that way. The studios still control what gets shown.
Yes, because contracts in place,
Yeah.
and you still have the challenge of distributing the media, the DCPs.
Yeah, well, that's not hard to make if you know technically how to do it. And we can cover that subject in a later episode.
We will.
Because my last film, we did all that. We've done the digital. I didn't even want to go to film or celluloid.
Right.
I thought, what a waste of money these days.
Am I allowed to ask how many people turned up?
We did a 4-wall screening of a kind of premiere. It was a full house.
What?
That was one screening though.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and then it went online.
Right.
Then it's like so we didn't do a cinema
We
release
went
with this one.
direct to digital. There.
Direct to digital download and that kind of thing.
I did a film like that once. I had 3 people turn up, and then it went direct to oblivion.
Yeah, it's gone into oblivion for the most part, but you can find it if you want to. Look, this next story, I really didn't know if I wanted to include this, but I think it's an important topic we need to discuss. Yeah.
Oh, this is the horror film one.
This is the horror film one. So the Australian horror film, The Loved Ones, which actually, for those who like horror, is an excellent horror film. It's very well written, very well acted, etc., etc.
Is it like a blood, guts, gore film, or is
It does get a bit gory, and there are torturous scenes in it. However, this fellow in England, Gary George of Chester in the UK, he's reenacted some of the torture sequences from this film on a man who was his best friend and killed his friend as a result.
That's pretty sort of yuck.
And I'm not going to go into the details of it. You can read this article here. It'll be in the show notes. And I don't even want to talk about the murder itself and what inspired him. But the fact is, it brings up an endless topic of how responsible should we as filmmakers or games creators be if people, take this, which is meant to be a piece of entertainment, and reenact it and either hurt someone or hurt themselves.
The general response from something like that is people will say the audience is supposed to be able to distinguish between what is real and what is imaginary. So when you're playing like a first-person shoot-'em-up game, it's not real. So you're not supposed to put yourself in the frame of mind of trying to reenact it.
But can we be responsible for the psychologically impaired people, like I'm sure he must be, to have done this? It's influenced him in some way.
Sure, look, it's a bad case, but then the real question that you're asking is, should we stop making movies? Should we, some particular plot line, because some idiot might go and do the wrong thing with it? Well, hell, should we stop producing cars because somebody might get into one and kill everybody? It's the same argument. Clearly the answer is no, we shouldn't, but clearly it's also not very good when people go and do nasty things.
I mean, it's just tragic that something like this happens and that an Australian film, a horror film, and there are other films of this, like Saw, which is also semi-Australian, and that's often, it's a torture film. But heavy metal music.
Are you saying Saw is almost Australian, it's a torture film because all Australian films are torture?
No, because it was made by Australian filmmakers, but it was done in the US. But it's often levelled against horror films, metal music, various computer games, that they influence these sort of things and therefore they should be banned. I disagree with that personally.
And I agree to disagree as well.
But, the makers of the film, The Loved Ones, they must be feeling awful at the moment that somehow they feel partly responsible for this happening. Don't feel it's not your fault. Honestly, guys, it's not your fault. It's Gary George is
It's all right. You heard that here. You heard that here from Phil and John, and it's not your fault. We forgive you.
yeah. Anyway, moving right along, something a bit lighter.
Okay.
Christopher Doyle, Australian cinematographer. This is one for the cinematographers out there, who is best known for his work in Hong Kong with Wong Kar-wai. Brilliant cinematographer. He's done this very funny interview. There's a rather extensive one. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. But you know, we have other asylums in other parts of the world, and I live in one of them, and I intend to continue being a lunatic. And that's one quote from it. Have a look at that. It's just a written interview. We don't have video of it there. Wonderful cinematographer, very funny guy, very frank. If you're into cinematography, if you like Chris Doyle at all, check that out. But I would like to finish our news segment with another cinematographer, Roger Deakins, who has worked a lot in Hollywood and most recently worked on the last James Bond film.
Bond movie.
We have a video here from Roger Deakins, a short talk about his career and what he'd like to have done differently. Let's run that video.
Advice is really hard, you know. It's funny, since I met so many cinematographers now since I've been living in LA, and every one of them have come into the industry in like a totally different way. I mean, in the early days when I started, most people would come up through the grades as being a runner and then as an assistant and moving up. But it seems to me now most of the younger cinematographers did what I did, which was go to film school and then come out shooting rather than being an assistant and just try and get work as a shooter doing rock videos, or as I did documentaries, and a lot of people starting commercials. And so there's not really any one set way. But I think you have to, I think the best thing to do is try to understand yourself, understand why you want to do it and what you have to offer, your own visual way of seeing things, not necessarily a style, but just your way of seeing things, and develop that and go in that direction rather than just going out and saying, oh, I'll shoot this film, that film, any other film. That's what I would say. And perseverance. A lot of perseverance, because it takes a long time for most people. I mean, some people are lucky and get a film that is seen at Cannes or wherever, you know, and they get a break because they shoot a movie that suddenly is a big film. But most people have to work at it for a long time before they get, you know, what they say, recognition, whatever that is.
If you could go back and meet yourself at the beginning of your career, what would you warn yourself about?
Oh boy. No, I don't think I would, because it's been exciting, you know. I mean, I made mistakes. I've been on films that I shouldn't have been on, and you know, I've had terrible experiences, but I've had wonderful experiences. But it's like love and hate on Robert Mitchum's fist. You can't have one without the other. You know, you can't have the good without the bad, or you wouldn't know. So the warning would have, I don't know, you know, it's a lot of reasons why you go in a certain direction, and it's a lot of luck and a lot of just chances, and you know, it would have happened all differently, wouldn't it?
No, that was a really good little slice from Roger Deakins.
Nice vignette.
Nice vignette. But on that, this is turning into a cinematography show because we have our own tutorial here. What we're going to do is, as part of this show on a regular basis, we're going to run a series of tutorials. And we've already shot the first few with one of our cinematography teachers here at CIFA, which is Paul Howard. And the first of that series we're going to include in the show right now. Hello and welcome to this, our first of the series of tutorials on cinematography with Paul Howard. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Phil.
I guess we're going to go through some of the basics of camera and cinematography, but I think the first thing I should probably ask is, what is a cinematographer?
Well, a cinematographer's role is mainly camera and lighting. So they liaise with the director and they work out exactly what kind of shot to do when, and the director, the DP then goes and works out the infrastructure for that. If he's got a camera operator, he'll get the camera operator in there and get the gaffer to organise where the lighting is going to best suit the shot.
Now you said DP. Is that means director of photography?
It does. It's an American term that Australians are using a lot more now. In Australia, for a long time, we use DOP, director of photography. So the profession is cinematography. So you are a cinematographer. A DOP, or director of photography, is a title that's mainly used on drama or feature films, but you know, also more so now these days in terms of commercials. You know, to define the fact that you're in charge of the camera and the lighting. You may or may not have an operator, camera operator.
So sometimes you're just in charge of the lighting, which I think is the case more in the UK. Yes.
Well,
and they're not an operator so much.
Yeah, you're not an operator, but in terms of you are in charge of the look.
Yeah.
And so therefore you're going to tell the camera operator where to put the camera, and you're going to tell the gaffer, you're going to discuss with the gaffer where to put the lights, what type of lights to use, what type of lens to put on the camera, after you've discussed all of that with the director in terms of what shot you're covering and how you're going to do it.
So if the director of photography is in charge of all that on a feature film, for example, sometimes I've heard it used that a cinematographer is more the term used for documentary camera people.
It can be, yeah. I've also heard that term used here for lighting cameraman. But lighting cameraman is mainly a term used in the UK, as I say.
Does that mean the same thing basically though?
Yeah, it all means a very similar thing, yeah. I mean, you'll be defined by, if you're a camera operator, you'll be called a camera operator.
Right.
But a DP is the director of photography, yeah.
So the DP, DOP, cinematographer, whatever you want to call him, he's the head of the camera department, effectively, yeah?
Camera and lighting department.
Camera and lighting.
Yeah.
And so beneath him, what are the various roles that he might be in charge of?
Well, the camera department would be the focus puller, and depending on how many other assistants, these days you might have data wrangler or clip loader. You might have more assistants depending on how many cameras you've got on a shoot. You'll have operators or an operator.
Unless he's operating himself.
Unless he's operating himself, yeah, which depends on the type of job. It really depends on the type of job. You might be running 2 cameras and therefore you'll have another operator and you'll operate one yourself.
And then there's the gaffer.
There's gaffer, and then he'll have a best boy, which is his right-hand man, and then you'll have electrics after that. And
grips. Are they technically camera department or something else?
No, grips are the camera support. So whatever goes underneath the camera, whether it's a shot bag to an enormous Lumar crane or whatever, that's what the gripping department does. They also can be in charge of things like blacking out windows and building rigs for different things. Again, the DP's in charge of them in terms of what he says goes, or she says goes.
So these are all people that help enable the DOP to do his job, her job.
Yeah.
So what's the relationship then between the DP and the director usually?
Hopefully very cohesive.
In terms of, you might get some directors that are very, have a clear vision, they know how they want things to look, and the DP, I presume, you've talked about the lighting, but they're also very much in charge of how the shot is framed, how the camera moves.
Depends. I've worked with different directors. Some directors are just really focused on performance, which obviously I love, because I have no say in that. And what I realise is, you can be the best cinematographer in the world, but if the performance is not being looked after, it's not going to help the performance to have it beautifully shot. Obviously, when they're married together, it's an awesome experience, and that's what the filmmaking part of it is. But the relationship, the DP's director with the relationship is an extremely important one for both of them to realise the director's ultimate vision. I'm just a character in the film, like the look of it is just a character, and just as important as the sound, just as important as a whole bunch of other elements that all come together.
The other main one is production design, another whole department that contributes to that look.
Yeah, absolutely, and all equally important. And it's awesome when it all works together very well to bring the director's vision, to life. But some directors, they'll get right in behind the camera and they go, no, I want it framed here, or yes, please, up around here, the camera move is from here to here. Some will have it very technically planned out. Others won't so much. They might kind of just want a different, more of a busking kind of feel to it,
So some directors might have a very clear idea of what they want the camera to do. If they don't, then they rely more on the DP to help make those choices for them. Yeah?
Sometimes, yeah. And sometimes, I've worked with directors who just love the organic energy that comes out of being in the space and the way the particular light is happening at the time. And I enjoy all of those kind of experiences, because it's all part of it, yeah.
All right. We're going to move on with our future tutorials. We'll get a bit more hands-on with the cameras and tripods and things like that. But that's the end of our introduction to what is a cinematographer. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
And that was the first of our series with Paul Howard. We have more coming up where we get a bit more hands-on with tripods and cameras and other things. The plan is that in the future we're going to do a whole series of these with other teachers here at CIFA on writing, on directing, on sound, all sorts of disciplines. So if you keep watching the podcast, you'll see lots of these. Great stuff for first-time filmmakers wanting to, or students like we have here behind the cameras, wanting to get into the film and TV industry.
And there's always things that you can learn from an old hand.
Yeah, and there's a couple of old
I'm
hands
not saying
here.
old because he's old, you know, but as soon as you've got somebody who's been in the game for a little while, there will always be things that you can learn from that person.
And the great thing here, not to spook the college too much, is that all of the teachers here are out in the industry working, including ourselves. We're out there working professionally in one capacity or another. And then on our spare time when we can, we come here and teach. And Paul is one of those people who's always out there doing some kind of work.
Well, we'd like to be out there working. I'll just, I've got my card here and I'll just, I'm available at the moment for...
In fact, John, I wanted to talk to that because one of your roles
Yes.
is you're part of the SIMPTI organisation.
Yes, I am.
And you're part of a committee recently that's been working out fixing cinema sound. Tell us about that.
Well, interestingly, a lot of that has also been driven by one of my SIMPTI colleagues who is based here in Australia, and he certainly had a bee in his bonnet about what happens to sound after it leaves the mixing room. It's got into distribution, it gets to the cinema, and then at that point, do we know what it's actually going to sound like? And the problem is, we don't know what it's going to sound like. It could be in one of your four-wall rooms, and it could be that big, or it could be that big. It could sound like anything at all.
So there's no standard for cinema sound?
And no, and this is what's called the cinema B chain. So the A chain is up to the point where the film is made. That's all of the sound creation and the mixing and everything else. The B chain is when it gets to the cinema. And we have no idea what's going to happen when it gets into the cinema.
But there's been THX, for example, which is a kind of a standard for this kind of thing?
If you set up a room to THX procedures, then you have a room that's supposed to sound like a specific room.
Yeah.
But not every cinema is.
No, they're not obliged to do that, of
No.
course. And this was what George Lucas hoped, and it's never quite taken off.
George Lucas was quite reasonably hoping that if he set up the mixing room a particular way and he set up the cinema a particular way, or indeed the living room, because you can set up a living room as THX, and he was sort of hoping that that would yield the right result, that whatever it was done in the mixing room would actually sound that way.
But it's basically just a series of specifications. So if it's this quality and it's set up this way, then you probably get a really good representation of what the mixer intended.
And that's exactly right. And so you go, well, what's the elephant in the room? And the elephant in the room is there's actually no easy way of measuring that. And there are no standards around measuring it. And there's a lot of differing opinions as to how the sound and how the room should be measured for setup.
So on this committee that you're part of, how are you solving this problem?
Well, the first thing is a lot of people are debating what's good and what's bad. And I mean, debating down to the level of what type of microphone should you put where in order to establish what it is that a person might hear in the room and what that should sound like.
How do you measure it?
And then work out models that represent a good form of reality, taking into account the fact that, you know, real rooms sound like real rooms. Unless you're going to build an anechoic chamber, spend $1 million creating a room that actually sounds like nothing.
So can we define what's on the materials on the walls and the carpet and everything else?
You don't want to get there. And by the way, you can't. You'd spend much more money than anybody's ever going to recoup from selling tickets. So you've got to come up with something that's actually deliverable and sensible and practical.
So we're setting a range that's acceptable, are we?
So what you do with the standards process is you invite anybody who's interested to come to the party, and everybody gets together in a room. Well, in this case, it's like virtual rooms. The discussions are taking place globally.
Beauty of the internet.
Yep, and then you coalesce opinion. Eventually, you get opinion together that says, all right, on the basis of the consensus, here's what we think the standard should be. And everybody who's participating gets to vote.
Now, it's probably too soon to say anything about what that standard will be, yes, but when it is sorted out, does that mean every cinema now says, you must support this standard, you must adapt your cinema to do this?
No. The only time that would ever happen would be if there was some technology with which, if you weren't compliant, you would get nothing. So, for example, if you want to watch this program on a TV set using, PAL, there's no point in having an NTSC television set. You won't see anything.
Yep.
Or it'll look wrong. Whereas, sound in a cinema room, at worst, it's going to sound bad. It might not sound right.
But it'll work.
It'll work, yeah. So the other thing, of course, there are commercial implications here. You've spent a lot of money setting up a room, standard changes, and you go, ooh, it would have been nice if I'd known about that when I was building the cinema a year ago.
So when you define the standard, how are you going to get people to implement it and implement it well enough that it's worth the effort?
Well, it's always worth the effort because it provides everybody with a target. Straight away, they know what they are aiming for. So if you don't fix the problem immediately, you eventually flush the problem out over some period.
Just by saying you're non-compliant?
Well, no, by saying here's a target. You say, okay, in the future, everybody will want to be standards compliant. Here's the standard. I can start building my room to that standard.
For future renovations and developments, they can work towards that.
And that's exactly what's happened. It's like on day one, we didn't see everybody producing 3D in the same way. And it's going to take a couple of generations before 3D or stereoscopic vision in cinemas all works as well as we would like.
And this then becomes the issue, which I'm sure you're facing, discussions of, because it's going to take a while for the standard to take hold. We're looking forward 10 years. Technology changes.
Well, that's one of the challenges with standards. And what you want to do is create a standard that is sufficiently enduring that it will last the distance. MPEG is a good example of a recent standard that is actually lasting the distance.
MPEG's one, definitely. I find...
one of the many MPEGs.
Yeah, the audio standard used on CDs is still like 44K 16-bit stereo, still valid.
Yes.
And the other one that I always cite is MIDI, which is used for musical instrument digital interface.
Yes.
Which goes back to the mid-80s, and it's still barely unchanged.
And there's probably no reason
and
to
incredibly
change it
versatile.
anytime soon. No, that like MIDI is likely to go for a long time. 35mm film, well, any minute now, nobody will bother with 35mm film, but the fact is that was made a standard in, I think, 1916, and you can go and get any film that's been produced since then and put it onto a 35mm projector and it will work.
I wish we had a standard like that for digital cameras. There's so many versions and formats out there at the moment.
And that's the downside. In a competing market, sometimes you get this way, that way. Competition's valid.
But this is what SMPTE does. I mean, those of you who don't know, they set these kinds of standards. ISO 9660, for example.
Which is not a SMPTE standard.
Sorry, but they're standard like that. And SMPTE and other organisations, they set these standards.
Standards development organisations.
Exactly.
We're there to facilitate. We don't make the decision, we facilitate the process.
And you make the white paper that says, here's how, if you want to be compliant with this, which we all think we should, here's how you do it.
Yeah, that's how it works. We can talk about that more.
And we will.
In another show.
In another show, perhaps. Another regular segment that we're going to do, in fact, in this show, is a little thing where you get to write in and ask me a question and I will try to answer it. My background is very versatile. I do lots of different things, so anything that is technical, anything that is creative, let me try to answer it for you. And this is a little segment we call Pick My Brain. Pick My Brain. See, now it's the point you come in with a spoon.
Oh,
you do that.
I'm just looking for the zip marks across.
Did that look like me in that opening graphic?
It did a little bit,
it didn't
without
have
the beard.
Yeah, we did that before I grew the beard, but maybe I should change.
And when you had a decent wardrobe.
What's wrong with
Just
my
keep
shirt?
going.
This is my son's band. This is why I wore it. Our first episode, this is my son.
Sick puppies.
Sick puppies. We have a question from Iona, which I know of memory, and it's one of these questions I get all the time, which is, what is the best editing software to use?
And the answer is, thank you and good night.
And the answer is, there is no easy answer. There are dozens of editing programs out there, but I'm just going to talk in terms of professional editing software at this stage. because everyone out there watching the show is a serious person about filmmaking, TV production. There's basically 3, maybe 4 choices, really. There's Avid Media Composer, which is the king of video editors, and if you're a serious professional working on feature films and high-end TV, that's what you're probably used to, that's what you would have learned, that's what you should be using. Avid Media Composer. They also do Pro Tools for audio development, audio sound design. Final Cut Pro from Apple was, for many years, the leader in the mid-range, so to speak, the lower high end, if you like. But as of 2 years ago, when they released Final Cut Pro 10, everyone is jumping ship from that.
Well, and that's because what they managed to do was dumb it down.
Yes. I reviewed this when it first came out. I used to be a journalist for computer magazines, reviewed all this software, did comparisons about this sort of stuff.
Until they dumbed you down?
Until the company got sold and I got sort of made redundant, basically. Final Cut Pro 7 was the last real version of the program that people liked, and even then it was a bit long in the tooth. When they came out with 10, they did a total revamp, total architectural, total reprogramming. They had to do this. It was a change that they needed to make, but it was almost, everyone kept calling it iMovie Pro, iMovie being the low-end consumer version, the freebie that they give away. And unfortunately, it's a good program, but it's not a professional program anymore. It was lacking a lot of the stuff that professionals needed, like tape output and multi-camera and things like that, which in the course of the past 2 years have been added, many of these things. But they're saying, look, it's just too different.
It's maybe too little too late.
Too little too late. I'm going to Avid, or I'm going to Adobe Premiere Pro, which is our third choice. Adobe didn't used to be taken very seriously in this business, but in the last few years, especially with the release of Premiere Pro, and especially since version 5 and now version 6, it is a serious contender. It's especially important if you're going to be doing visual effects in After Effects, because the workflow is really great there. If you do graphics in Photoshop or Illustrator, it's a whole suite.
The advantage that Adobe has got is that it is a brand, and all the products, all the family products within the brand could reasonably be expected to work together.
And they work together very well, and unlike Apple, I must admit, in recent years, they do listen to their users. They're very focused on user feedback and making changes that their professional users demand. Apple have kind of dropped the ball with Final Cut. It's really not an important product for them anymore. They make their money on iPads and iPhones and this sort of stuff.
And so what's product number 4?
Product number 4, in my opinion, would be Sony Vegas, which is PC Windows only. It's not a Mac program, unless you boot into Windows on a Mac, which you can do. It's a pretty good video editor.
A lot of people, but videographers, without putting too fine a point on it, say the wedding videographer, the people who are doing serious video shooting, but at the mid-professional, lower professional level, a lot of those people swear by Vegas. And
Vegas, I like
really
because it's a pretty good video editor, but it's an excellent sound design tool. I prefer it over Pro Tools personally. I think the sound in Vegas is the best of any of these programs. A lot of wedding videographers also choose another program called Edius, which is good in its way.
Cheaper?
I don't know what the price is currently, but it's in that lower ballpark, yeah. And there are others. There's consumer programs, which I'm not going to go into, but they're the top professional programs that you might see.
Well, I would think if somebody's got if you've got a favourite program,
let us know what you use.
Let us know what you think. Send the email to the thing that's on the screen right now.
So use our Twitter account for now, @agirlandagun. In fact, this is where we're going to wrap things up, and I will say, when we get our website fully up and running, we'll have a proper email. But for now, if you want to contact us, @agirlandagun through Twitter. If you have a Pick My Brain question, please send it to @agirlandagun. If you have any comments on the show, any suggestions, if we've got anything wrong, let us know. If you know better, please do inform us.
Where did you get the question, if there's anything wrong?
It's our first episode, give us a break.
Which camera? Which camera am I looking at?
Do feel free to contact us. If you want to give us a Pick My Brain question, you can Twitter us, send us a link to a video, or you can even send us an audio version. We're happy to receive those as well, and we'll show that as the question. It can be creative, it can be technical. I will try to answer anything you come up with. But that's it. That's our show for the day. And I don't know, that went pretty quickly. I don't know how long we were on for just then. You got anything to wrap up with? Anything to announce to the world?
I don't know how long it is we've been on air, but I think it's time to say goodnight.
Okay, and that is for us, that's the end of our first episode, and that is a wrap.
All you need to make a movie is a gun and a gun. Come along and join the party while we stare at the sun.
Good. That was it. That was one. Thank you very much. We can stop recording.